You're listening to an Ono Media podcast.
Good morning, and thanks for joining me for Rise in Crime, your morning caffeine hit all about crime. I'm Mama Jules, and our first story on this Thursday reads like a Hollywood movie script. Mafia-style hits, luring people to their deaths, burying bodies on property you rent, and even a Jeffrey Epstein angle. Except it's all true and real, and 4 people are dead, and a man is spending the rest of his life in prison. 56-year-old Nicholas Tartaglione worked most of his adult life for the Briarcliff Manor Police Department in New York State. He did work briefly for the Mount Vernon, Yonkers, and Pawling police departments, but the majority of his career was spent at Briarcliff until he was forced into early retirement when he was placed on disability for a workplace injury. But life was not all that bad monetarily for Nicholas. He was receiving a $65,000 annual pension, and then he had some side gigs that supplemented his income. His legit side gigs: selling cars and running an animal rescue operation. His not so legit side gig: selling steroids. Nicholas looks like a bodybuilder. It's clear he spends time in a gym, but those associates that he met in the gym atmosphere accompanied him to a life of crime and eventually murder. In June of 2015, Nicholas was renting a property in Mount Hope, New York. 41-year-old Martin Luna, who was visiting his friend Cruz, who worked as a ranch hand on the rural Mount Hope property. Well, Martin brought along in that visit his employer, Jason Sullivan, who owned a construction company. And during the visit, the pair, along with the ranch hand, they all began talking with Nicholas. They noticed Nicholas was growing marijuana on the property. That's when Martin suggested that Nicholas expand his operation and begin trafficking cocaine. Now, this seemed to all just be ideas that were floating around during this afternoon chat, but it became real when Martin began moving cocaine. His employer, Jason Sullivan, had a home in Florida, so he's down in Florida. And Martin made arrangements to buy cocaine in Texas and have that cocaine sold in Florida with the help of Jason Sullivan. Now, this operation was launched just 6 months after the convo at the Mount Hope Ranch. So where does Nicholas come into play? Well, it seems he made an initial investment of $200,000 into this cocaine trafficking opportunity. Nicholas's goal was to get enough return on his investment to finally purchase the Mount Hope property instead of just renting it. But we're working with 3 states here. We've got Texas, we've got Florida, and New York, and we need mules, people to move the drugs. So they recruited Nicholas's brother, Michael, and phone records and hotel receipts show that Michael took the $200,000 and drove it to Texas. There he exchanged the money for the drugs and then drove those drugs to Florida. Martin picked up the drugs from Michael, and then that cocaine was stored at Jason Sullivan's house. But we're missing a key piece here. Who's selling the drugs? Well, that's being handled by Urbano Santiago. He is the husband to Martin's niece. So we're keeping all the illegal activities in the family here. Urbano would sell the cocaine 1 kilo at a time, and he did so over the next few months. But it's not an endless supply, and you're going to run out of cocaine. $200,000 only scored 7 kilos for these fellas. So Martin made an executive decision, and he used the proceeds from the first 7 kilos to buy more cocaine in Texas and bring it to Florida to sell. But the new buy? Well, it went bad, at least according to Martin. He said he contacted a seller in January of 2016, and that seller worked a deal. But when Martin left the money at the drop location, no drugs were exchanged or delivered to Martin. When Martin reported to Nicholas that he had lost the profits, Nicholas seemed to believe him at first, and the pair, along with their associates, worked to retrieve either the money or the cocaine. They were just trying to recover the loss. But when the recovery effort wasn't working, Martin ghosted Nicholas. And now you know how the script goes. Nicholas wasn't going to go away quietly, but he also wasn't going to do the dirty work. He recruited 2 of his bodybuilding buddies, So here they are, bodybuilder and school security guard Joseph Biggs and former Haverstraw and New York police officer and strongman competitor Gerard Benderoth. Well, those two bodybuilders, they become his bulky minions who are going to scare Martin into returning Nicholas's investment. And these men are huge, and they understood the assignment. Initially, they established communication with Martin, but Martin became spooked and the communication was cut off. From there, they couldn't locate him, so they recruited a third helper, Mr. Drugstore himself, Jason Sullivan. So Jason Sullivan got a hold of Martin, and Jason told Martin that he actually had a legitimate and legal job for him to do. He simply needed a roofing estimate for a roofing job that he felt like Martin could handle. Well, the two scheduled to meet up at a bar and talk about it on April 11th of 2016. But Martin didn't come alone. He innocently brought along Urbano. Okay, remember, he is the 35-year-old guy who moved the initial cocaine to buyers in Florida. He also had his nephew, 25-year-old Miguel Luna. He was with him, and also his family friend named Hector Gutierrez, and he's 43 years old. Now, the four arrived at the Liquid Lounge, but this bar isn't neutral territory. The Liquid Lounge is owned by Nicholas's brother. So we're basically having a standoff in this bar. You've got Martin and his three friends facing off with Nicholas and his two bodybuilder friends who are going to finish their job that Nicholas tasked them with. There is a debt to be settled. As the four men entered the bar, Gerard Benderoth and Joseph Biggs took the men by gunpoint and tied them up near the bathroom. And now, entering stage left, Nicholas. Inside the bathroom, the two, Nicholas and Martin, had words about the money that Martin owed Nicholas, and this whole conversation lasted for about an hour, and there were fists and beatings that were involved. And then the strong men heard Martin choking. They checked in the bathroom, and Martin was laying at the feet of Nicholas with a zip tie around his neck. You guys, but there's witnesses. There's Martin's friends sitting right there. So Nicholas got a tarp from his car, and they wrapped up Martin's body, and they drove the body to Mount Hope property. And Gerard and Joseph? Well, they loaded the other three men in a different vehicle, and they headed to Mount Hope as well. Now, all of this at the Liquid Lounge, it was detailed on surveillance footage that was obtained by authorities from the security cameras. But there are no security cameras at the Mount Hope property. So for this part of the story, we have to rely on Joseph Biggs' testimony. And you heard that right. He turned state witness and gave testimony. Joseph told prosecutors that all three of the innocent men who were bound by duct tape were forced to kneel on the ground at Mount Hope. These guys had nothing to do with the missing $200,000. They were just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Joseph said he was then forced by Gerard to shoot one of the three men. After his execution was complete, he handed the gun to Nicholas, and after turning his back to the scene, he heard two more shots. Joseph believes Nicholas shot one of the men, and Gerard shot the other remaining man. So all three men were shot in the back of the head. Then Nicholas and Joseph dug a hole to bury the three gunshot victims and also the fourth man, Martin, who died of strangulation. Well, the next morning, Nicholas and the ranch hand named Cruz finished the job together. They finished burying them, and the four victims remained buried for months until under pressure by investigators. Cruz, remember he's the farmhand, and the body barrier, well, he led authorities to the grave in December of 2016. From there, Nicholas was arrested and charged with the four murders and also with drug conspiracy. He has been incarcerated in a federal prison since his arrest in December of 2016, and he was being held without bail. I want you to just hold on to that nugget for now because it's going to come into play later. Remember, this all went down in 2016, and in April of last year, Nicholas finally faced a jury. That was in 2023. That's 7 years. Now, the first witness at the trial was the crime scene investigator who unearthed the bodies at the Mount Hope Ranch. He testified to finding the zip ties used for strangulation of Martin. And then Joseph Biggs testified. He spoke to the shootings of the 3 innocent men. He also explained how Nicholas drug Martin's nephew into the bathroom at the Liquid Lounge so that the innocent nephew could witness the beating of his uncle. Now, the ranch hand Cruz testified to burying the bodies and to the cocaine operation plan that was hatched during that initial meeting. And Jason Sullivan, well, he testified to storing the drugs and helping lure Martin to the Liquid Lounge so that Nicholas could enact his revenge for the lost $200,000. And experts testified that a drop of blood was found in the bathroom at the Liquid Lounge, and DNA testing identified that blood as Martin's. But one man did not testify. That was the other bodybuilder, Gerard Benderoth. And this story is about to take another Hollywood twist. 3 months after the bodies were unearthed, FBI agents attempted to detain Gerard while he was driving just a short distance from his home. The FBI agents were detaining him with the hopes of convincing Gerard to turn state's witness as well, like his counterpart did. But when Gerard pulled over, he immediately called the Haverstraw Police Department. Now, remember, Haverstraw is about an hour north of Manhattan, and it's the small town where Gerard lives and where he worked for a short time. He's familiar with these procedures because he was a retired New York City police officer and a Haverstraw police officer. While the representative from the department was on the phone, Gerard stated that he had been pulled over, and then he shot himself. You guys, it's just one more tragic loss in this story filled with tragic loss. Okay, so back to the trial. During closing arguments, the defense attorneys tried to poke holes in the testimony of Jason, Cruz, and Joseph. He told jurors not to blindly accept testimony from people who were just trying to save their own skin. The defense attorney floated the theory that it was Joseph who strangled Martin at the bar. He even said Joseph has a propensity for strangling. He also told jurors that they did not need to blindly accept what the government was presenting to them. And he said that it was Cruz who masterminded the cocaine plot. Now, the prosecutor said exactly the opposite, of course. That's what you would expect her to do. She said the case was open and shut, and that the powerful evidence was clear that Nicholas was guilty. The prosecutor also said Cruz could never mastermind the plot since he had a second-grade education. Well, eventually, after one day of deliberations, the jury found Nicholas guilty on all counts, including the drug trafficking conspiracy. And this week, after more than a year since his conviction, Nicholas was sentenced to spend the rest of his life in federal prison. Nicholas told News 12 that he is a cop in prison for crimes that he didn't do. The sentence came on the heels of Nicholas writing a lengthy letter to the judge, asking for his conviction to be overturned. He told the judge that it wasn't like him to tout his good deeds, but that this is not a normal situation. He wrote that during the trial, he was painted as a man that could kill someone. He said it was more egregious that he was painted as a man that could kill someone simply over money. He emphatically declared in that letter that he is the farthest thing from that. Well, the judge obviously didn't believe that the letter held evidence worthy of a reversal of the conviction. He also called the acts monstrous during the sentencing portion of the trial. Okay, we've got some unanswered questions here. What happened to the other guys? Due to his cooperation with federal investigators, Joseph Biggs was sentenced to 16 years in prison. Joseph apologized to the victim's family during his sentencing and said he had no intention of being involved in a drug conspiracy. And Jason Sullivan, well, he was sentenced to 10 years behind bars after pleading guilty to kidnapping and drug charges. Now, his sentence was also much lighter since he worked with investigators to provide testimony against Nicholas. And the Hollywood script isn't over. I teased you at the start of this update that there was a Jeffrey Epstein angle, and indeed there was. Nicholas and Jeffrey Epstein shared a prison cell for several months. And if you dig into the recesses of your mind, you might remember that Epstein was found unconscious in his cell in 2019 with marks around his neck. It was Nicholas that alerted guards to Epstein's reported suicide attempt, and prison officials did clear Nicholas of any wrongdoing in the case. Now, Nicholas's defense attorney told the Daily News that Epstein and Nicholas had become friends during their time in the notorious Metropolitan Correctional Center. The Epstein suicide attempt raised awareness to the brutal conditions in the MCC, and Nicholas's attorney said the inmates live amongst rats and disease. The defense attorney said the food is insect-infested and barely edible, and that the prisoners do not receive proper medical care. Now, it was just a few weeks after this suicide attempt that Epstein was found dead in his prison cell on August 10th of 2019. And as a reminder, Attorney General Bill Barr said Epstein's death was a perfect storm of screw-ups, and those screw-ups included non-functioning cameras and a violation of jail procedures like inmate checks. Okay, I'm not even going to get started on the multitude of conspiracy theories. We'll save that for another episode. But the connection here is that Nicholas was credited with saving Epstein's life. And remember that letter that Nicholas wrote to the judge? Well, he used the Epstein angle to explain that he was the only other inmate in MCC that could be Epstein's cellmate, mostly because he was viewed as the guy who wouldn't harm or extort information from Epstein. He also wrote that he performed CPR on Epstein and that a killer would not do that. All right, let's take a moment to remember the victims and also Gerard, who was lost to his family forever due to this tragic drug entanglement. Gerard was nicknamed the White Rhino on the world's strongest man lifting circuit. He reportedly could bench press 625 pounds and squat 800 pounds. He left behind a wife and 4 children. And the 4 men who were killed, that's Martin, Urbano, Miguel, and Hector, I couldn't find much on them. I do know some family was present during the sentencing portion of the trial. And I think that the prosecutor was partly correct when she said that the murders of these 4 Mexicans meant that no one would care that they went missing. No one is disposable, and I truly hope that wasn't the intention behind these murders. To the families of the 4 men, I hope you can find more peace in the grief process with the assurance that justice has been served. And now to a case suggestion by one of our loyal Rise and Crime listeners. And this update is out of Oklahoma. And the mystery is deep on this one because after 10 months, investigators still have very few answers in the death of 19-year-old Noah Pressgrove. All right, Noah grew up in Comanche, Oklahoma. He was surrounded by siblings since his parents divorced and each had remarried. Family said he had an outgoing personality and was naturally spontaneous. They called him a country boy that knew how to work it with the ladies. He loved the outdoors, especially anything to do with water, and his athleticism was evident. He lettered in football, wrestling, cross country, and track. He was also a member of the Ray of Hope Church. At the age of 17, Noah emancipated himself from his parents, choosing instead to live with his grandmother. He had most recently graduated from Comanche High School, and life was waiting for Noah to capture it. But on the evening of September 3rd of last year, Noah vanished from the tail end of a 4-day party with his friends. He was discovered by a truck driver the following morning on a desolate stretch of US 81 in Terrell, Oklahoma, and he was wearing nothing but mismatched shoes. One shoe was the Hey Dude brand, and another was an Adidas. Both shoes were covered in grass and debris. Now, a pair of white printed shorts that have been identified as Noah's were found several feet from his body. And his body was ravaged with massive blunt force trauma to the back of his head. His skull was fractured. His fingers were torn nearly from his body. He had internal bleeding in his torso and several broken ribs and deep bruising on his left side. At the scene, Noah's teeth were scattered across the highway, dozens of feet from his body. And further away from his body was a solitary spot of blood. But you guys, that was concerning to investigators. There should have been more blood due to Noah's injuries. Now, his skin revealed signs of road rash on his left shoulder and his hip, and the fingers that were nearly torn from his hands, Well, that led investigators to believe he was desperately clinging to something before he died. And an even more puzzling aspect of the crime. 2 clumps of hair were found, one clump several feet away, and one on his right butt cheek. Now, the hair didn't have blood or tissue attached. And on his right thigh was a drawing of a stick figure done in black ink. All right, for investigators, the next natural step was to check out those friends and figure out what the 4-night party was about. According to reporting by Jenny Matthew, multiple theories have been floated about a potential wild party turned fatal. Some believe he was pushed out of a moving truck, while others believe he was murdered elsewhere and disposed of on the highway. Law enforcement have been quick to say they dismiss thoughts of a hit-and-run accident, saying that the lack of injuries to his lower body, well, that just doesn't match the typical pattern of a hit-and-run. Videos that were gathered from the party, because we all know people have their phones out at these events, so those videos depict a scene of alcohol-fueled celebration that included reckless behavior. Guns were involved and dares were challenged. Noah even wrecked on an ATV, but was seen alive following the wreck, and he continued partying with friends. But it's crazy party antics. The videos obtained do not show any portion of Noah's death. But those videos, well, they've not been shared willingly. The friends seem to be creating a wall of silence, making the investigation even more difficult. Friends have stated that an argument at the party did occur before Noah left on that Sunday evening. Now, a toxicology report that was released just a couple of weeks ago, well, it only showed alcohol in his system, but the medical examiner did say he did not test for oxycodone. So the takeaway is he was drinking alcohol, but there doesn't seem to be a whole slew of drugs in his system. Now, the Oklahoma State Bureau has deemed his death suspicious, but they also told People magazine that they are not investigating his death as a murder. Okay, are you feeling some sort of whiplash here? Because I am. They say it's not a hit and run, but it's also not a murder, yet it's suspicious. And Noah's brother, Dallin Pressgrove, well, he told People magazine that the ME's report did answer a couple of questions, but it raises so many more. Dallin says they are basically still at square one. He said the family needs more cooperation from the Oklahoma Highway Patrol. He said they are now searching for outside help to come in and investigate. The family has started a GoFundMe account to help in hiring an investigative team. All right, there is a Facebook group with 20,000 members, and it's called Justice for Noah Pressgrove. And the theories are abundant on this page. Some questions the group has presented are why so many people were allowed to move about the crime scene where Noah was found. The group questions how law enforcement conducted the initial moments of that morning. One young man, who claims he's the owner of the Hey Dude shoe that Noah was wearing, well, he says that friends of Noah were sleeping at a house just a few minutes from the area where Noah was found. And he claims that a boy came through the front door and woke up everyone, screaming that Noah was dead. Now, this young man said he jumped into his red Jeep and raced to the crime scene. He claims Noah was wearing black shorts when he showed up there. Remember, the reporting is that he was wearing no shorts and there were white shorts found near him. So this friend on the Facebook account is saying Noah's body was tampered with after being found dead. He also expressed disappointment in his friends who returned to the house and went straight back to sleep. But even this post was called into question by the group members. The members are also questioning if Noah's parents' home, if those homes were searched appropriately, and if the correct questions have been asked of the parents. All right, one thing is clear. The disagreements on this page are immense. For sure, this is a case I will be following. I'll let you know if more updates surface. And finally today, I told you I would let you know what the sentence was for the LA businesswoman who mowed down 2 boys in a crosswalk nearly 4 years ago. Now, if you haven't listened to the last podcast released on Monday, I thoroughly tell the story of Rebecca Grossman, who was found guilty of murdering 11-year-old Mark Iskander and his brother, 8-year-old Jacob Iskander, when she was racing her boyfriend in their individual Mercedes SUVs through a residential neighborhood. All right, if you need to listen to that, go on back and listen. I'm here to tell you about what happened on Monday afternoon. Rebecca was sentenced to 15 years to life by a Los Angeles judge. In addition to the sentence, Rebecca was ordered to pay over $47,000 in restitution to the Iskander family. That also will include a $25,000 donation she had already made to cover funeral expenses. She's also been sentenced to 3 years for fleeing the scene of the accident, but that sentence will run concurrently with the other sentences. All right, that's your Thursday episode of Rise in Crime. If you're loving this content, please share this show with a friend. And we always love 5-star reviews and a positive comment. And you can like and follow on all of our social media and YouTube accounts that we have here at Oh No Media. That includes Rise in Crime, Into the Dark, and Murder with My Husband. Join me again on Monday for more morning crime news. I'm Mama Jules, and keep safe out there.